Morning, Kozhikode, and welcome to this another edition of the Literature Festival, the Kerala Literature Festival by DC Books. And it's my great pleasure and honor, privilege even to be here on the stage speaking with Tanya Abraham. Um, the organizers gave a very interesting insight into who she is and what she's been doing. So since we don't have too much of time, I think we'll just go straight into the questions. Welcome, Tanya. Not yet.
Audible? Yes. Thank you so much, Anand.
To start with, I think food. That's something that you are so passionate with, probably as much as you are with art itself. So, food and cooking are an integral part of your life and work. So, how does your passion for cooking influence your storytelling, whether in books or through your curation of art, Tanya?
Well, I think it's all about creativity. So whether it's food or whether it's art or writing, it finally boils down to the same idea of how you curate something on paper, or whether it's in your gallery, or whether it's even in your mouth. So it's been a passion of mine, and I would say that I'm not a great chef or a cook or anything like that. But I love the idea of culture and everything concerned with culture, and that's sort of how it all came about. Yeah.
Food clearly is something I think we all resonate with. Even as we were driving down, I was looking at the number of food kiosks there. Kerala's cuisine is celebrated for its depth and diversity, isn't it? So, is there a particular dish or a food memory that holds a special place in your heart, Tanya?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so my book concerns largely with the cuisines that came from the spice trade that happened in Kerala. And there are specific communities that are associated with the spice trade. And very surprisingly, during my research, I found that it's because of religious affiliations that certain things lasted and certain things, didn't, for whatever reason. And when you talk about something which is memorable, definitely it is food from my community and my paternal community. I'm from Fort Kochi. And my grandmother used to make a lot of food which was very influenced by the Portuguese reign in Fort Kochi. It was also influenced by local Kerala cuisine. So it's kind of a marriage between the two. It's different, quite different from the Syrian Christian cuisine. But at the same time, you do find ingredients which are similar, and you find techniques which are similar. So you have a cousin of a particular dish. So I would say it's a pickle. Actually, it's called para. It's made of shrimp. It's called chemin para. It was made by the Portuguese. And what we have is a variation of that. And they used to bring garlic and meats, red meats, which were preserved in barrels of vinegar and salt and paprika, and on ships when they travel to India. And it's a version of that, with a little more spice and a little more, tanginess and all of that. Yeah.
There is this one section in your book where you talk about the Christmas cake which your grandmother made, the vanilla Christmas cake. You want to share something about that?
The Christmas cake. So Christmas cakes were made all through Fort Kochi and then there was a whole thing about you exchange the cakes and the different flavors that changed. My memory is her starting really early. You preserve all the fruits and all of that many months in advance, and then there's this whole ceremony at home, because I grew up in a joint family of everybody coming and mixing that and things like that. And that largely came from the British influence that was there in Fort Kochi at that time. And we also have a version of, I wouldn't say a Christmas cake, but it's something like that. It's called Brother, and it was by the Dutch. And we still have it in Fort Kochi. So that's a version of the plum cake more than the Christmas cake. And it's very strangely eaten with mutton kurma.
Wow. That's something very interesting. Cake and mutton kurma.
Yes, well, it's sweet, and it's an odd combination, but it's very delicious, and it's been there for centuries where I come from. Yeah.
You mentioned about religion, so I wanted to ask you, how is religion an identity factor that marked certain food traditions, particularly cooking styles in Kerala?
So that's a very important idea, because when Christianity or Islam or Judaism applied to the shores of Kerala, and would started, finding root on the shores of whether be it Musris or be it Kozhikode or wherever. Um, what made it last was the fact that there were religious practices, and whatever happened in Kozhikode or in Kochi or Kollam or wherever it is, there was a marrying of the local as well as what was brought from outside of India through the spice trade. And what made it last is religion over the centuries, because that's a practice that tends to keep a custom or tradition going. And the other thing is because a specific feast or a specific fast would have a certain kind of food, then that becomes a new dish that is created, omitting a few ingredients, taking in new ingredients, and a whole new gamut of ideas come together. So religion really has played a very significant role in both the development as well as the preservation of food and food culture.
Because you mentioned a lot about food, I don't know what are some of the unique cooking methods or food habits that traders brought to Kerala shows. I know you have done a lot of research here, so it'll be interesting to glean some facts from there.
Yeah, let me tell you, it was quite a tough research because there was hardly anything recorded anywhere. So I had to literally go from families to families and then scholars to scholars, trying to figure this whole thing out. And one of the earliest forms is, of course, we have things like what we say China Chatti today, which are from the Chinese. They never settled here, but they came in ships, but they brought their utensils with them. And then, so using woks with high flames and for frying and things like that. The Portuguese influenced a lot. So they were the ones who brought in vinegar to India in cooking. We had it in pickles earlier, but not in cooking. They introduced steaming and even baking. So we used to we still call ovens in Fort Kochi as borma. So that's where it was baked. And so this whole idea of baking and steaming, the putta, was a derivation that came because of the travels the Portuguese did from one part of Kerala to the other. And they didn't have rice in their cooking, and they didn't eat rice the way we ate. So they devised a new form of using they steam a lot in the Mediterranean. So they use that to develop something new. And techniques like that shifted through the centuries and were developed.
What was one of the most fascinating, one of the oh wow moments when you were researching food, particularly related to Kerala?
It's really funny because I found how possessive people can be of recipes, and and also it's like it's your baby and you don't want to share it. I totally understand that, but unless they shared, I couldn't go back and find out why this technique was used or why this ingredient was added by a particular community or a family. That was a wow. I was like, wow, it's people are really possessive about their traditions and what's been passed on from generation to generation. But otherwise, I would think it's the vastness of cultural influence on food in Kerala. I mean, we're such a small state, and then we have all of these influences that's come from across the globe because of trade, and that has really infiltrated into the fabric of society.
Is there one particular thing about Kozhikode that you found?
Well, I was in Kannur for some time for a couple of trips to find out about how the Arabs had influenced food, and then how wonderful and vast the cuisine is here. And what was really interesting was because of the very matrilineal influence on society, this was one community where food really was preserved and cherished because the women ran the kitchens and women ran the homes, and they were literally the heads of families. So that really played a very important role in how food was developed and how it was actually celebrated through through lives, and I didn't see it as much in the other communities, simply because there was the patriarchy was less, and that's largely because the Arabs used to come, influence, and leave, literally. Yeah.
I want to talk a little about your writing as well, Tanya. So, cooking often reflects a blend of creativity and tradition. So, how do you strike a balance between experimenting with food while preserving the cultural essence?
I think it's all about passion, and one can really preserve what belongs to somebody else, and not adulterate it with your own thoughts. At the same time, you kind of put your shoes into your feet into a reader's shoe, or somebody who wants to experiment with cooking, and then you realize what really works. And it's always and always storytelling, and it's always and always the recipe that meant something to somebody. And that for me was the ingredient that kind of glued the whole research together, to keep the soul within the creative process and the writing. Yeah.
So do you find parallels between cooking and writing, both being creative processes in some way? Maybe if there's something you could tell us to share that connection.
Yeah, for sure. Also, writing and eating. um, well, it's all about your senses, and it's all about creativity at the end of the day, like I said when we started. So it's an expression. Cooking is an expression. Cooking is a way of feeding. Cooking is a way of loving, and so is writing. It's a way of expression, and it's a way of telling, and it's the way of bringing communities together. Both genres of creativity. So for me, there is no difference literally between my art and my writing, and anything I write. Like I said, I am not a great chef or anything like that. But the idea of food being something which kind of awakens one's senses and brings people together is what would make you write about it. Yeah.
There is this one quote from your book I wrote down here. It says, I found that food is an expression of identities and histories of people's and families' experiences. Could you expand on that, Tanya?
Yeah, sure. So if
About your identity and how it shaped the way for
Yeah,
food.
for sure. So, food is something which is a common language that exists across society, right? And so, if I want to know more about you, I would come to your home and I would eat with you, and I would relish what you or your wife may have made. And it's the same with any community. It's about keeping what is alive through food, because one is that is something which really doesn't drastically change across generations. You might change it a little bit, but the essence really remains the same. And then, like I mentioned, if there is religion intertwined in the whole thing, then the possibility of change again is very minimal. It's going to take many, many years before that can be shifted. So, a certain religion or a certain idea of a religion requires a certain kind of food to depict that. And that's how the identities of a lot of people are developed, and it's so connected to the food we eat, the way we think, the way we want to develop something new. For example, what would I cook for Christmas versus what you might cook for something else, and it's completely dependent on what am I celebrating, or what am I giving up, or what am I fasting for, those kind of things. And that really is a part of who we are as human beings. And food is something which is really inextricably linked to it.
I'll ask her one more question and throw it open to the public here. So, you have often mentioned in your books how your grandmother inspired you in many ways, isn't it? Would you like to share a couple of memories of that?
Yeah, for sure. The book is dedicated to my grandmother. She was a fabulous cook, and also to my mother for her soul food. My grandmother was a freedom fighter, and she was also a very educated woman. But as I remember, she spent most of her life in the kitchen because she had to keep the visitors who came into the home. And I was a little child, which was part of the family was in politics for more than 100 years. So she had to feed all of them. And then I would see that would be a certain kind of food. And so she adorned a certain role at that moment. And then when she had to cook for the family, she would adorn another role. And then she threw these fabulous Christmas parties for the community. And then I would see her becoming this matriarch who would come up with recipes from Mrs. Beaton's book, which was gifted to her by a Britisher in Fort Kochi at that time, because I mean, they've been there since early 1900s. So that's who she was, and she really sparked something in me, the kind of attachment and commitment she had towards cooking, and how she really catered to human needs through that, and the way she played with ingredients. She never followed a recipe, and that's how I think every woman or a grandmother or a mother in a kitchen really comes up with something different, because you're playing with what the people you love like. Yeah.
Is there one comfort food that you still prepare at home, something that she passed down to you?
Yes. So I run to my mother to have comfort food. I don't make it. But we do have something called an appam, version of an appam, which is influenced by the Portuguese. It's made of it's steamed. It's made of rice flour and coconut milk, and the banana. So the etaka, that's steamed, and it has a very comforting flavor for me, because I grew up eating that, and because it's a little bit of an elaborate process, I don't spend time anymore making that, and my son's sort of left home, so I go back to my parents' place for that. Yes.
Let's throw it open to the public. Any questions?
Hello. Yeah. So this is regarding the putte affair. You talked about how Portuguese introduced putte and stuff. So recently there was a script in Manorama about putte through literature.
Sorry?
Putte through literature. Putte, the whole how putte
Through
was in
literature.
literature. And it mentioned about how putte was there in early 15th century Tamil writings and early 16th century Tamil writings, where there was a whole story about Ganapati and Puttu and stuff, and Tamil literatures. So my question is like, it says that the Dutch or Portuguese introduced Puttu, because in your writing it says they introduced it rather than they making it more like spread among the people. So I just wanted to understand how did you come to that point?
Yeah.
Because, yeah.
Yeah. So in the Sangam literature and in Tamil literature, what they largely talk about is a version of the opo or the appam, and that was what was there at that time. So it could be that they have sort of mixed the two. As far as I know, my research that is what I found, and the whole idea of steaming it in a rice powdered form came in much later. But the Sangam literature definitely talks about it, but it's not the puttu per se. It's it's a derivation of the appam. And if you still look further down, you will see that another version of the appam was also brought by the Jews into Kerala. So, it's always a little different. Like I said, you take something that exists and you change it. So in the Philippines as well, they have another version of what we call the puttu. And then we have our appam in Sri Lanka, which they're debating whether the Dutch took it there or whether we borrowed it from them. It's a debate that goes on. So I'm not aware of this, but I'm aware that Sangam literature did have a form of the appam. So it could be a version of that. Because steaming was introduced much later. We didn't really have the idea of steaming in Kerala for a long time. That was not a technique we used. എന്തോ അതാ ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞത് ഫിലിപ്പീൻസിലുണ്ട്, because they had a common Portuguese Dutch colonies there, right? So it was taken that way, and also because of we had a lot of similarity between the Malays and Kerala, also through Buddhism, which is initial, and then the Portuguese, and then the Dutch. So it's you always share between communities and countries. Yeah.
I suppose all the coastal areas, that's me talking.
I'm sorry, where are you?
I'm here. No,
Okay.
I'm thinking probably all
Bring
the
it to there.
coastal countries, so to speak, had a pretty common food. There was a trend like that.
The coastal areas, are you talking about because of the spice trade? Well, sort of, because again, you are changing everything based on the ingredients available in that area. You're changing based on the religion of that area. Of course, they might eat more fish, but how are you preparing the fish? For example, if you take the Syrian Christian community and you take the Latin Catholic community, or the Syrian Catholics for that matter, we have the meme policha, which we all know about, and it's prepared similarly in technique, but the ingredients are completely different. So the Syrian version is much spicier, has red chilies, and it's tangy and all of that. But the other one is made more from coconut milk, and it's lighter. It doesn't have red chilies, a little bit of green chilies, and there's turmeric. But they're both made in the banana leaf and over a tawa or whatever.
What could be the reason for this difference?
The place and Portuguese influence. Portuguese, although had a lot, they brought the paprika into Kerala. We didn't have that before, right? We had pepper, but they didn't use too much of it in everything. So we sort of changed it over the years to our taste, and even our achapam, for that matter, or rose cookies or whatever. Now it's a Syrian, specifically a Syrian Christian snack or whatever. But it initially was influenced by the Portuguese when they came. Yeah.
I think you have a question.
Yes.
ആംഗ്ലോ ഇന്ത്യൻസിൻ്റെ ഭക്ഷണ രീതി പറഞ്ഞല്ലോ, പൊതുവെ സാധാരണ കേരളീയർ കാണുന്നതിൽ കുറച്ച് വ്യത്യാസമായിട്ട് കേരളത്തിലെ ആംഗ്ലോ ഇന്ത്യൻസിനിടയിലുള്ള ഫുഡ് രീതി എന്താണെന്ന് പറയാൻ പറ്റും?
അത് ബേസിക്കലി നമ്മളിപ്പോൾ ആംഗ്ലോ ഇന്ത്യൻസ് എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ ഇഫ് യു ലുക്ക് അറ്റ് ബോംബെ ഓർ കാൽക്കട്ട, ദ ലാർജ്ലി ബ്രിട്ടീഷ് ഇൻഫ്ലുവൻസ്ഡ്. നമ്മുടെ ഇവിടെ എന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ ദ ബ്രിട്ടീഷ് ഇൻഫ്ലുവൻസ് വാസ് വെരി മിനിമൽ ഇൻ ദാറ്റ് സെൻസ്, ബിക്കോസ് പോർച്ചുഗീസ് ആണ് ലോക്കൽ വിമനെ കെട്ടിയത്. Britishers also did marry, but not as much. But the Portuguese had passed order from Portugal. There was an order saying that the Portuguese soldiers should marry upper caste Kerala women, but which of course did not happen because upper caste wouldn't marry the Portuguese. And so, for whatever that happened in those days, when you get married and you have a family together, it is completely different, right? So number of Portuguese in the Variambol, it is all about what they brought, their techniques. So the Portuguese really don't have a stew. But in places like Fort Kochi, Anglo-Indians have a specific kind of stew, which is again British influence, but there is a little bit of a difference. So the main difference is the fact that we have strong Portuguese influences, especially because of marriage, while in other Anglo-Indian communities, it's more about the British influence. Mangalore, there is again Portuguese influence. Goa, there is Portuguese influence. But we are much older than all of them. We are much older than Goa and Mangalore and all of that. Endo? Sorry? Syrian? Catholics. No, the Portuguese were Catholics. So the history goes that when I'll be deviating a little bit, but when the Portuguese came to Kerala, one of the missions was to convert people to Catholicism. But they were already Christians from the Middle East and Babylonia and all those areas. So what they did is they forced converted a lot of people. Appo our forced conversion kore പേര് Catholics ആയി. Then there was a feud between the Catholics saying they're not going to pay allegiance to the Pope. They're going to go back to the old Babylonian or the old Middle Eastern, Central Asian sort of worship. There was a synod of Diamper which happened sometime around the 16th century. And that created the separation. So the Syrian Catholics and the Latin Catholics are different, very similar, but different. Historically, the Syrians claim to be from the St. Thomas's line of conversions, while the Latin Catholics and the Anglo-Indians are Portuguese converts. Yeah. So there is always a difference on. And also because on those days there was caste system very prominent, that also played a big role, where the Syrians claim that they came from a certain culture. I mean, these are all historical things. There's no proof for anything.
Do you see a lot of changes happening even now, Tanya, over the past history,
in
the more
food?
recent history?
In food, I would say that people are cooking less. That's the big change. I mean, we're talking about cooking which requires some effort. So if you ask even me, I cooked so much more earlier than now because I have less time and I don't have children at home anymore to cook for. So that changes a lot of things. And then you cook, when you have a good cook who's your mother, who's bringing the family together whenever there's an event, you're not cooking again. So I think that's the big shift. I mean, of course, people are more open to different kinds of cuisines because of travel and all of that. But innately, I think the idea of cooking and techniques, and you can't pull that out from a Malayali, right? I mean, we need our food.
Okay, I think we are running short of time, but just one last question. Is there something like a pure Kerala food or cuisine?
Yeah, so initially my research showed that before all of these influences came, we were initially largely vegetarian because of Buddhist influence, and then the eating of meat and fish was very gradual. So the tribals ate a lot more meat and fish, and then with all of these foreign influence, it started changing. Things started shifting then, and that's how that. So we were, like we were hunter gatherers in the beginning, and then you move into one into the other. But we have our cuisine, which is so prominently Kerala. I've only spoken about what's come because of the influence. Yeah.
Any other questions from them? If not, we can wind up. We got just 1 minute to go.
Somebody else.
Do you speak about banana jam in your?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
No, Kerala, they've got banana jam that comes from the Christian community that is even spoken about in Arundhati Roy's book also. Banana jam.
Yes,
so,
she mentions that. Yeah.
So that banana jam, it's originally, does it come from Mangalore?
Can you keep the mic a little lower?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So does that banana jam come from the Mangalore side or this side? Because in my family, though we were not in the Christian community, but because of my great-grandmother's Christian friends, she learned this banana jam recipe. And later on, I saw this in Arundhati Roy's book also.
With the making the big banana jam.
Yes, the banana jam. And so that banana jam is exactly the same recipe that it's kind of a special thing in our family, banana jam.
Okay.
So I was just wondering, like, does it come from the...
Not to my knowledge. It's very Christian.
It's very Christian because it's there in her book.
Yes, it's very Kerala.
Yeah, it's very Kerala.
It's very Kerala.
So it's not from Mangalore Christians.
No, not to my knowledge. But we have things like banana cheese and all that came out later. You have your guava cheese,
Yes.
But this is a very popular and common jam that is made in all our homes.
Oh, it's made in all your homes, right?
Yes. Made in all our homes.
Yeah. So
and in fact, derivations of it. The spices change a little bit, and then you have a new variation.
So it's from Kottayam.
I'm sorry?
Is it from Kottayam?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Everything moves one to the other. And I think Arundhati Roy mentions it in Kottayam. And it's more, I've seen it in the Syrian Christian families. Yeah. My mother's Syrian Christian. So I've seen it a lot in her family. And we had more of apples and so-called imported fruits towards the Fort Kochi side kind of a thing. Yeah.
This can be only made with Mysore param.
Mysore param, that's right.
Only that. Yeah. Because then only it becomes red color.
Only then it gets, and then you have to sieve it to get the thin.
Exactly.
It's a process.
Yeah. So it's like something very special in our family because my
that's wonderful.
grandmother learned it from her Syrian Christian
That's so
friend.
great. Yeah. We'll run out of time.
I think we can wind up. If any other questions, if not, once again, thank you very much, Tanya. Thank you very much for this interview. Thank you very much to the lovely audience here.
My pleasure, and thank you for being here with us.